Okay, so today we are looking at simplifying the complicated, creating a better digital experience for your consumers. Panelists, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Jeremy Mandel. I'm the Solution Consulting Director at DCX. So we're bringing together a few agencies who've worked on a lot of Acquia and Drupal projects in the past for sort of big system integration-based projects, as well as recently for a client on a large site studio and design system-based product.
Fantastic, thank you. Matthew.
I'm Matthew Stocker. I'm the digital technical owner for Glendinplex. Glendinplex is the largest manufacturer of heating appliances and has a major stakeholder in home appliances. Brands like Roberts Radio, Morphy Richards, Dimplex Fires, Faber Fires. There's about 40 brands, so I'll leave it at that. And we're using Site Factory to implement and consolidate our web portfolio.
Fantastic. Last but not least.
Thanks. Mark Wright, I'm Technical Director of Depth, based out of Dublin. I suppose our core competency, why we're here, is we have our Depth Centre of Excellence based out of Dublin. And we work closely with Matthew and teams. You know, the whole word of partnership, it's key to it, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, the partnership's definitely a theme that we're hearing today, right? And that's why we've brought everybody together under one roof. Let's learn a little bit more about the project. So, Matthew, maybe you can tell us kind of the history of what happened at Glendinplex and how you got to where you are today.
Not as big as Bayer, which is funny because in 2017 I was on the Bayer project.
How about that?
With one of Mark's colleagues, Archie, as things work out. About 4 years ago, the landscape for Glendinplex, which is a global business, they would have had around 300 websites of varying degrees of size, different applications, varying from WordPress to Wix to Magento, Drupal Commerce, and each of the local businesses or divisions would run them and own them. That came with tension, both internally in the businesses for kind of leveraging latest technology, security, scalability, efficiency, cost. And as part of a larger digital transformation within Glendinplex, which was spearheaded by an SAP project, the executive looked at how would we consolidate centrally a governance model and a technical stack that would give more to each business, but with a scalability and security around it. So we're 4 years in. We have 50 web shops, presences. We have 4 pillars within that. We have PIM, Informatica. We have Commerce Tools as our e-com engine. Then pivotally for how we roll these sites out is Site Factory.
Yeah.
And then next to that, we obviously have Microsoft Dynamics as our CRM. But we use Site Factory as a code once, deliver many times.
Yeah.
So we have a single code base for that. And each of those integrations, because we're using standardizing of integrations, we develop those integrations once and reuse and reuse and reuse.
Yeah.
Very similar to what Bayer have done. The core principle behind what we were doing was how can we, as part of a global digital transformation, make it as easy as possible to have buy-in from the divisions and the brands, consistency of design and messaging, while still giving each region, each market, each marketing manager the autonomy to then use the product that we were developing in a bespoke fashion.
Yeah. And so just drilling into that a little bit, was it just this ease of use that was the reason that you started this, or was there a business driver or a catalyst for the kickoff at the start of the project?
The kickoff, the drivers were multiple. When we look at a global business as Glendinplex is, having a view on IT security. You look out and you've got 34 brands plus all using different applications. It's very hard to kind of have a governance model whereby you can say, are we IT secure? Are we protecting both our customers, our brand reputation and experiences people go through it? Speed to market, depending on what you're using and not being able to leverage the global merchandising marketing material, the collaterals that were there, you're extending the amount of time to market. Consistency of messaging. If you can't leverage that message in Australia as you can in Canada or coming from brand owners like Morphe in the UK, again, you're putting obstacles up all the time. So removing obstacles constantly from the individual businesses and then looking at, in parallel to that at all times, customer experience. How do we get the sales funnel to be optimized once? So we're doing it once and then rolling it out so we have an optimized sales funnel and ease of payment. So although we use a global payment gateway, each of it is customizable depending on the region and depending on what kind of culture is there and what they use.
Fantastic, thank you. So again, partnership being a key theme, I want to turn over to Mark there. How did Dept get involved with the project and what's the kind of origins of that?
Yeah, sure. So, like, I suppose Matthew and team as a product owner with the vision and had already chosen, a lot of the architecture. And I think that was key because they had sought a standardization worldwide. They'd sought Acquia as, the DXP that they needed. And then we also spotted, in combination with them, the product mentality. So we're building a product. We're not building a website for this jurisdiction. We're building a product that can serve many jurisdictions. And once you build it out and give flexibility on design with a global design system, you're now allowing each brand that's using that single code base to learn. They're actually learning together, so we're able to add changes in. So you now put your product roadmap out there. The sites are being delivered, they're e-commerce sites. You give the flexible architecture of adding plugins because you've different, say, rating and review sites depending on what jurisdiction you're in to show reviews. So you make it flexible to allow to add that. So what we found was, we agreed. They were putting together an architecture. We had that product mindset that was building out iteratively their roadmap. And again, it was I just think it comes down to relationships.
Yeah,
you work with people well, but I have to say, because I'm doing it for another client, if you've the architecture in place, it just makes it a whole lot easier. As one of the previous speakers says, you don't have to worry about it. That was key.
Yeah.
Just on the collaboration, the one thing where we work well is arguing, is saying no. Because I get it wrong more times than I get it right, and most of the time people don't see it. Because Mark and Archie and Stephen and the team will question what we want to do and keep us honest and make sure that the core principles of what we're building is what drives us each time. And if you just have an agency that is doing the work, I have a horrible analogy that I use all the time, and I use it way too much, is the car. If you give a developer a picture of a car, and they go, I want you to build that. And they go off and they build it, and you go out and you go, that's perfect, that's exactly the car I wanted to build. And you go to open the door won't open. And the developer tells you, but you didn't give me a photo of the car with the door open. You want someone who's going to interrogate what you want and your requirements and push back on it. And that's the same with the Acquia team, though. We work very closely together with the Acquia team, questioning what we want, seeing what the best solution is, and how the products that are there, Acquia Cloud, Acquia Site Factory, Cloudflare, and then looking at how we would expand that into personalization.
And I think the team is key because it would be remiss of me to not point out, we've a couple of grandmasters, but particularly Archie, our head of Acquia. He sees the car door open, he sees the sunroof, he sees the boot open, he sees the car move, he sees all the scenarios, and he can bring it to life through Acquia and through those experiences. So I think it's a combination of really talented architects, but a combination of a product owner who has a vision, I think, is the key.
Fantastic. I just want to drill in as well to some of these kind of building blocks, the reusable components that you've worked on to deliver. Could you maybe, just to bring it to life, give an example of, when we were talking about it, you talked about one particular example that you've been able to use across multiple sites?
So the whole concept of what we're doing is Lego blocks. So we build the Lego blocks and then we give those to the marketing team and say, there is a box of Lego. You go play with that. And every so often we'll get feedback whether or not it's a heat loss calculator. And they go, this is something we want for the website. So what we do then is we sit back and we go, okay, we'll get your requirements. We'll also put this out to the rest of the businesses and brands who work in the heating category and see what their requirements are. And then we build a scope for that once.
Yeah.
And then we build it once and it gets deployed. But the moment that gets deployed, because it's a single code base, that's sitting in the background of every single one of our sites, waiting, may not be used, or with the heat loss calculator, we've now got 5 sites using it.
Yeah.
We have store locators, who's selling our products and what products are they selling. We build that once, test it, go through QA, UAT, release, goes into production, and that's then available for every single one. All 50 websites have that, which is configurable within Drupal, and that's done.
And underpinned with a global design system. So the design thinking has looked across the brands, thinking what's the variance, what needs to make this work across 50 brands, and that kind of scalability thinking. Because if you go in thinking one brand, you will get something fit for purpose for one brand. But I think the global design system that Glendimplex brought to the table underpinned the reusability, I think.
Yeah.
But from a costing model, it means every time we're looking at how much will a store locator cost to develop, how much time will it take to do a heat loss calculator, we're looking at it and going, well, how much would it cost to do 50 of them? How long would it take to develop 50 of them? So when Bayer were showing the curve up of deployment, it's funny, during COVID, it was all talking about flattening the curve. We're doing the same thing. For every site we put out there, for every brand we engage in, that curve gets lower for the cost of that site.
Yeah.
And the same for every component we develop. So if we can say, how often can we use this? How many people are going to benefit within our business? And then we can work with the design teams, work with the developers to make sure that it's customizable within the Drupal. And styling, all of that becomes something that the brand managers within a business or the merchandising managers in a business can customize.
Fantastic. I'm going to come back to you both in just a minute. But Jeremy, speaking of design systems, you've also been working on that with one of your customers, right? Could you tell us a little bit more about the project that you're thinking of today?
So unfortunately the client couldn't be with us today, but they're a FTSE 250 bank, an insurance company. They've been working with Acquia for quite a long time, and there's quite a few case studies out there about their use of Site Studio. They came to us because even though they've adopted Site Studio and used it for a lot of the capabilities that we've described in terms of sort of being able to give it to the wider team, what they really wanted, and they were, sort of, if you look at the sort of makeup of their team, was to drive the approach of their sites from a design system point of view. So the majority of the team who were building or who were specifying and running the project were actually from the design team within the business. So their ambition was that they could have those atomic components, that they could determine, sort of when they would be used, what versions would exist, and within all of the different sites that they had, they could specify, different treatments, and then in which site each of those would be used. Where we then sort of looked to maybe see if we could go further was in automation around actually taking what they'd done in InVision as a design system, so they'd adopted the InVision design system, and implementing then automation in terms of the build pipeline. So taking those components, building them in Storybook was the objective, then taking the design tokens out through from InVision, as well as the code from Storybook and automating the pipeline to have those built into either composable components like the sort of Next.js or JavaScript ones, where maybe they wanted to run like a calculator or something more interaction heavy, or just bringing them into the Site Studio components, where then the rules that they set, effectively the designs that they were creating, would get converted automatically into the components on the site. And the components on the site would then be orchestrated. They could be set the permissions, when they would be used, how they would be used, into then the deployment onto each of the brand sites. Some of the things in there were challenging, sort of the idea of automating, effectively from a designer's pen right through to a web build is, a great objective in a way, but there are some quite big challenges there. Certainly the technology itself was a big challenge. Actually, that sort of tooling, a CI build process right from Envision through to the website, it doesn't really exist. We investigated, and there are ways to do certain elements, but in reality at the moment, you can't just take from a designer's pen and have that jump into a website. So what we learned was, there's a lot in there around the process of actually taking from those designs, taking what we can outside of the design system, taking things like design tokens, variables for CSS and styling, and getting them into Site Studio, but not necessarily having the automations for everything sort of running in the background. So it takes a lot of then sort of working with the client to actually say, okay, well, how and when do you want to process that means that if you have got a change in your design system, that you want that reflected? When do you want a developer to pick that up? And when do you want that to be a dialogue with you versus actually a developer picking it up and going, okay, you have made a slight change to the permissions or to the color schemes, and when do you want that automatically pushed through? The other sort of big area, I guess, where we struggled a little bit was in terms of sort of a design system sort of tends to work at that, sort of component, atomic and molecule type level. What it doesn't, though, explain is what the functionality of those components should be. So, if we've got a component that looks like it's doing exactly the same thing as another component, it's a promo with some content and some external data coming in, that doesn't necessarily mean that if they've got another component that looks exactly the same, that's what, we need to just replicate and have as the same Site Studio-based component. And within the Site Studio world, I think you have to be very clear up front about what functionality you're going to have within those Site Studio components, so that you understand whether actually it's the same component being shared, or if you need to take that component and actually start from scratch to have another version which looks the same but does something different.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we try to do here at Acquia is make our products as open and as flexible as we can. And I don't just mean open source by that, by the way. I mean open in what you can connect them to do or how you can develop with them. And I think, this is a great example of being able to, mix things up a little bit, right? You don't use Site Factory, but you've still got a multi-site setup, and then you've been able to still use Site Studio to bring in that brand governance, right?
Yeah.
And I think, so then talking about successes, you just launched a site last week, is that right?
Yes, we have. So the site for the client, it launched, I think, started this week.
Yeah.
So it's the first of a series of multi-site distributions that will be going out. Each one for a sort of different area of the financial services that they provide. So the first one is sort of premium finance.
Yep.
The next one will be motor insurance. I think subsequent ones are in the other sort of sectors that they provide insurance for. But as you said, I mean, we've used Site Studio a lot, and what we found ultimately was that all of the sort of brand and design system requirements that we needed could be reflected through that. It provides those building blocks that, as we've said, give developers or give team members the autonomy to go build out their version of the component. But what was missing was that governance tool for them to actually say, okay, on site A, we want the team to have access to these components, but these treatments of them. So at the time, we weren't really, and the client wasn't looking at using Site Factory. But yeah, as you said, effectively what we did was build a new site, so a sort of clean distribution of Drupal through Acquia, where we build all of the Site Studio components within there. So all of our deployment and CI process builds into that site. And then what we've got is the flexibility to then have UI configuration where that design team, that main team, can go and specify which site they want the components to be able to be used on, what flexibility they have. So they now go in there and they can actually see a list of which sites each component's on. So if they want to go and make a change to it at that low-level design system level, they can see, well, what impact is that going to have? If I go and change a color of a small, atomic element of one of my Site Studio components, is that going to go and impact on, sort of these 3 sites who are using it? Because then their small button is going to suddenly look out of place with whatever else they've got. And obviously it then scales up and up and up. But I think we'd certainly like to look at Site Factory there as an option. And we're doing that with another client actually at the moment where we are using Site Factory. But as you said, I think it's the objectives, and the people have said it's the client needs that are really key.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Well, as we almost draw to a close, I promised I'd come back and talk about outcomes with you both. So you obviously started the project a few years ago, and now maybe tell us a little bit about how many sites you've got live and what that's meant for the company.
So we've got 50 live sites. We're in 3 continents. That's 50 markets. I think all in all it's 20 brands. We have reduced the speed to market of a branded site to a minimum. It would have taken months, now it takes weeks.
Yeah.
The largest part of that is content and imagery. We have a secure flow now for e-commerce, which is backed up within the configuration in Site Factory, of the Site Factory instance of each site. And from a stability sense, whether it's the uptime in Acquia Cloud of 99.98 for the 50 sites.
Yep.
We have security in relation to DDoS attacks, which we were, as a brand, we were quite open to before we took over some of the sites. We've had 0 attacks. Thank you, Cloudflare. 0 successful attacks.
I was going to say.
There you go.
That's the difference.
I was going to say 0 attacks.
Big
Wow.
difference.
Nobody
0
wants to steal
successful
anything from
attacks in the last 3 years. Not a single bit of downtime since attacks.
Fantastic.
To put that in perspective, we were losing weeks out of a year on some of the brands due to DDoS RNG. Overall, though, what we have and the result of it is consistency in brand messaging and consistency in what is a centralized solution, giving autonomy and state-of-the-art applications to each business.
Yeah.
And that's the bit where we can sit back together and we get very smug and very proud of ourselves and kind of go, we did that. That's what we've done. Yeah. The brands are able to sit at it and make it their own. They pump into their own marketing campaigns, and we can see the revenue that's driven and flowing through the e-commerce sites. But in reality, what Acquia has brought to the table is stability and consistency. And that is paramount in when we're looking at what we got a lot of support from the executive and the C-suite. And when we go back and say, that is a success, that's what we have.
Yeah, no, I can't, like you've said it all there. I think for us, we could concentrate on scalability for you and having that product mindset. I really mean it. The Acquia architecture means you can move quicker. When you've got good back-end, front-end developers and architects who understand the products, you know, the scalability can be built into it by knowing the brands. And then the autonomy you give each brand manager means they don't feel confined or they're getting the same template. They're getting all the flexibility they need to deliver their goals in their jurisdiction, but you're building it on a standard architecture. I think it's great.
And it extends the partnership.
Yeah.
So the partnership starts with group, my department I'm in, and we say Acquia or Commerce Tools, and brilliant partnership and collaboration with Dept. But then you extend that to the brands and the marketing managers and the businesses who feed back into it, and you're iterating and iterating because it's a product.
It doesn't stand still, yeah.
You're making it better each time, and you're looking at everybody's roadmap and going, well, we can pull that in next. So we're not finished.
I love that. I love that. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to thank all three of you for sharing your stories with us. Ladies and gents, let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you.